Welcome back to another episode of 3 Wide. I'm your host, Radney Crawford. It has been a while since I've put out a podcast episode, as most of this past season I've focused on YouTube and Instagram shorts and videos, trying to build up an audience, but now here we are at the start of 2025. I figured it was time to get back in the swing of things and back behind the podcast mic. And we're going to start out things in a big way this month with 3 episodes where we will look over the silly season signing drivers over this past season. How did they perform with their new teams? We'll also look ahead to the 2025 season, previewing each series, looking at the championship favorites, drivers on the hot seats. We'll have some bold predictions, as well as previewing the drivers mainly who will be stepping into new rides for 2025. But before we dive into that, let me tell you about our presenting sponsor, Hunt to Harvest. Hunt to Harvest continues to be a great supporter of this show and a brand that I am proud to represent. You too can represent them by going to hunttoharvest.com and upgrading your hunting apparel. They are fully stocked in their shirts where you can find designs for all different types of hunting. Whether it be deer, duck, or elk, Hunt to Harvest has a shirt for you. They also still have a good selection of rope and 7-panel hats, plus performance polos crafted to keep you cool and dry in any environment. When you're ready to check out, be sure to use the promo code RADNEY18923 for even more savings. And that's RADNEY 18923 at hunttoharvest.com. And starting out with the Craftsman Truck Series, our first driver I wanted to look at was Lane Riggs. After a couple seasons of part-time starts, Lane got his first full-time opportunity with Front Row Motorsports. This was a team that was just in its 5th full-time season. However, they've had no finishes outside of the top 10 in points, and they were champions with Zane Smith in 2022. And I had hyped up this signing thinking another playoff, possibly championship hopeful season would happen. However, Lane struggled out of the gate with only 3 top 10s by the halfway point of the season, and Lane ended up missing the playoffs, but he started to gain traction just before those playoffs started at IRP. He won the first 2 playoff races and would have 7 top 10s in the final 9 races. Most of Lane's success was on the short tracks, which is really no surprise if you look over his part-time starts. The short track seemed to be his bread and butter. In 2025, he will have to put it together on 1.5 mile tracks where he had 0 top 10s throughout this season if he wants to progress through the ranks. Overall, I would give the signing a B due to his late season surge, so expect big things from Lane Riggs in 2025. Another signing that I gave a lot of hype was Ty Dillon going back to the truck series with Rackley WAR. This team is also new when it comes to the full-time truck scene. This was just their 3rd full-time year overall, and they had pretty solid success with Matt DiBenedetto winning at Talladega in 2022 and finishing 10th in points in 2023. So pairing a young team on the rise with a veteran like Ty Dillon, who finished 4th and 2nd in his only 2 full-time seasons back in 2012 and 13, seemed like a match for success. But unlike Lane Riggs and Front Row Motorsports, it never seemed to gel between Dillon and Rackley. He only scored 2 top 10s before moving aside for Dawson Sutton. Dawson is the 18-year-old son of co-owner Curtis Sutton, and we'll have more on Dawson in the next episode. But it was a pretty sudden move, and obviously it just never seemed to work with these guys. But not all is lost for Ty Dillon, as he now moves back to the Cup Series full-time. But his return to the Truck Series in 2024, it left a lot to be desired. You also had Tyler Ankrum moving over to a new team in 2024, and we saw the reemergence of Ankrum in 2024. After the shine had kind of worn off on this once promising prospect, he won in the Truck Series at 18 years old in 2019, but since then, his career seemed to be treading water. But his move to join BMR in 2024, it looks to have put Ankrum back in the spotlight, at least when it comes to the Craftsman Truck Series. While he didn't visit victory lane, he looked like an early season championship threat. He scored 3 top 5s in the first 6 races, was performing very well. Now, he did struggle through the next 6 races after that, but he was able to get it together and have 7 top 10s in the final 11 races of the year. Ankrum set career highs in average finish, laps led, top 5s, and top 10s, and he now has momentum to build for in 2025, and with the departure of drivers like Christian Eckes and Taylor Gray, the door is open yet again for more of these drivers to step up and become championship threats, and I believe we will see Tyler Ankrum step into that role in 2025. You also had an entire team shut down at the end of last season, and that was GMS, where your drivers Rajah Caruth, Daniel Dye, and Grant Enfinger had to go and find themselves new teams after that shutdown, and all 3 had their own levels of success. Daniel Dye, his stats doesn't pop out at you. It wasn't a flashy season, but he did finish in the top 10 of points. He got his first career pole and the first 2 top 5 finishes of his Truck Series career. He was able to turn that into an Xfinity Series opportunity as he will join his BMR teammate Christian Eckes at Colleague in full-time Xfinity Series competition in 2025. As for Rajah Caruth, he scored his first career win at Las Vegas early in the year, and like Ankrum, he was an early season championship favorite. He tripled his top 10 totals compared to 2023 with 12 top 10s, and he was the first winner in the Truck Series for Spire that isn't a full-time Cup driver. He will be back with Spire Motorsports for 2025, and like Ankrum again, I believe he will step into a role and be more of a week-in and week-out threat for wins, and will also have a good run and a good shot at the championship. Then there's Grant Enfinger. I was afraid we would start seeing the end or the decline of Enfinger's time in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series, given his age and the newness or lack of success of his new team CR7. Instead, Grant went out and had just as strong of a year as he did in his last one with GMS. He won back-to-back playoff races at Talladega and Homestead to lock himself in another championship 4 spot. While he did come up short again, Grant proved he still has more in the tank, and he's becoming really the Justin Allgaier of the Truck Series. He's kind of become the veteran who is always so close to finishing the job, and maybe in 2025 he can finish the story like we saw Allgaier did this past season when he got the Xfinity Series championship. Now, switching gears to the NASCAR Xfinity Series and those silly season drivers, we start with Jesse Love, who made the move straight from ARCA after winning that series championship to the Xfinity Series, driving for Richard Childress Racing, and he had an impressive rookie season for a driver joining this series full-time at only 19 years old. My main concerns were his lack of experience in this car, his age, and maturity, as we've seen him have his fair share of run-ins throughout his ARCA career. Instead, he kept his nose relatively clean. He won at Talladega in the spring, locking himself into the playoffs, and ended up finishing 8th in points. He also had an average finish of 12th, and he did not finish outside the top 20 in the last 11 races. So he showed he can be consistent. He was running up front a lot, especially on the super speedways. Him and Austin Hill worked very well together, so that will bode well for them going into this season, not so much for the rest of the field. And I look at Jesse Love as a dark horse championship threat for 2025. We saw this past year with the playoffs, and nobody is safe. Nothing is guaranteed. And I think Jesse is consistent enough, and he will be running up front enough in this upcoming season that he will be someone to keep an eye on for sure, and he should win multiple races. Then we have Sammy Smith, who made the move to Junior Motorsports after his rookie season at Joe Gibbs Racing. And stat-wise, his season really matched up with his rookie year. Consistency was still a big issue. He did win the fall Talladega race to keep his playoff hopes alive, and he finished more races in 2024 than he did in his rookie season. He wasn't irrelevant to the level of his teammate Brandon Jones, but with Junior Motorsports bringing in full-time drivers and top prospects like Carson Kvapil and Connor Zilisch, Smith will need to step up and finish up front more and compete for wins so he doesn't get lost in the shuffle and kind of find himself as the odd man out. You then have Josh Williams, who after an interesting 2023 season where Josh took a negative like the Atlanta suspension after stopping on the start-finish line and kind of showing up the officials, he turned it into his best opportunity yet, joining Colleague Racing full-time. Now, Williams didn't quite step up like many had hoped, including myself. He had some decent runs, but he struggled to find consistency, especially at the first part of the year. Josh has done well in lesser equipment, so we know the talent is there, but when a driver jumps to a bigger team like he did, you hope and expect to see more. Luckily for him, he will be back with Colleague in 2025, but he will, again, like Sammy Smith, need to finish up front more and at least be in contention for some race wins just to keep your spot. Because if he's unable to do that, I don't see this ride going for him past 2025, especially when Colleague is bringing in young drivers like Truck Series champion Christian Eckes and Daniel Dye. Then we have what was probably the biggest signing in the silly season for the NASCAR Xfinity Series, and Hailie Deegan. And there's not a lot you can say positive about Deegan's time in the Xfinity Series. It was very disappointing. I, along with many others, expected great things from her, as she is the first female driver in quite some time that seemed to have true talent. I still believe she has the talent to succeed in NASCAR, but unfortunately it doesn't look like that's going to come to pass, as she is now off to build an IndyCar career. She lost her ride with AM Racing just 17 races into the season, but I don't believe all the blame lies with her. They had drivers like Cup champion Joey Logano run 3 races, Josh Berry run 2, and Dylan Lupton run 6, along with several others, but I'm focusing on those 3 because those were the guys that ran the most races. Logano scored 2 top 10s. Josh Berry and Dylan Lupton, their average finishes really weren't much better than Hailie Deegan's. Looking at that, I believe in 2 things. Number 1, Brett Moffitt is an underrated driver who has always lifted teams up in the running order far more than where they should be. And my proof in that is you look at his runs with R Motorsports, how they performed when he was there, and how they performed after he left. And the same with AM Racing, how they performed in that first year with him, where he finished 15th in points. He had a top 5, non-top 10s, and he was a contender on super speedways. But look where they are now. The number 2 thing is AM Racing will need to be patient with Harrison Burton, who is joining them full-time this season, and may want to look at a opportunity like getting a veteran driver like Brett Moffitt to possibly run a second part-time team just to improve and give you some feedback on your equipment. Hailie Deegan's time in trucks in the Xfinity Series were, statistically speaking, a failure. As I said earlier, I do believe she has the talent. We saw it when she raced with several legends in the SRX Series. We saw her win the ARCA West Series races. So I do believe she has the talent, and I wish her nothing but success in whatever form of racing she ends up in. 2 other big names in the NASCAR Xfinity Series that made moves in the offseason was Sheldon Creed and Chandler Smith, both joining Joe Gibbs Racing. For Sheldon Creed, after a tense exit from Richard Childress Racing, and for Chandler Smith, he came over after an inconsistent rookie season with Kaulig Racing where he was able to get a victory. And both drivers delivered in their own way. For Sheldon Creed, he had a career high in top 5s and top 10s, including 6 second-place finishes. It seemed like just when victory was right there for Sheldon, it always seemed like a caution or over-aggressiveness on his or someone else's part would ruin it. Even though he did not get a win, I believe he improved his stock in the sport. Before, he would almost always self-implode at the end of these things if the races did not go his way. I know I mentioned his over-aggressiveness just a few seconds ago, and while it was still there, it definitely wasn't as big of an issue like before. He did better at keeping it together and finishing the races strong, and the results showed that with such a drastic increase in top 5s and top 10s. I know right now he's either the butt of jokes from fans or their pity, but I'm going to make a bold prediction that will all change in 2025 with him moving over to Haas. I predict that he finds victory lane early and often and is a top candidate for the championship. As for his teammate Chandler Smith, who also had a career year winning 2 races as well as doubling his top 5 total from 2023, Chandler did a better job at being consistent throughout the season. He did not finish outside of the top 10 until the 8th race of the year at Texas, and when Daytona rolled around about the halfway point of the season, from there on to the end of the season, Chandler only finished outside the top 5 twice. When you look at the regular season points, Chandler was the number 1 guy. And to me, Chandler put himself in the conversation as the top prospect in NASCAR. Yet with the season he had and being one of the top prospects of the sport, the future looked pretty cloudy for Chandler Smith. He just announced a couple weeks ago his plans for 2025, where he is going back to the Craftsman Truck Series to race for Front Row Motorsports. Sponsorship seems to be the main struggle for Chandler, but also it could possibly be an attitude deal, as he is known to have run-ins and disagreements publicly with his teammates, as well as those within his manufacturer circle. Those are 2 characteristics that do not lend itself to a long, successful career, especially if you're wanting to be a Cup Series star. I'll dive into more of Chandler's 2025 outlook in the next episode, but what I will say now is this next season is going to be a key one for Chandler. I do believe he can go Cup Series racing and be a star there, and maybe this move to the Truck Series will open a path for him, but he is either going to have to remedy his sponsor situation or his relationship with his team and teammates at the shop. And finally, for the Xfinity Series, we have Shane Van Gisbergen, who shot out of a cannon onto the NASCAR scene, winning in his first career Cup Series start at the Chicago Street Course last season. And with that, Shane has made the full-time move to NASCAR, and this past season was his first year in the Xfinity Series, driving for Kaulig Racing, where he showed growth when it comes to oval racing, and that his performance at the Chicago Street Course in the Cup Series was no fluke. He won 3 times, all on road courses at Chicago, Sonoma, and Portland, and could have at least had 2 more wins on the other road courses at COTA and the Roval. What was most impressive about Shane this season was his ability to adapt and learn as the race went on. His top 10 and his top 5 count may not be popping off the charts, but the amount of top 20s, top 15s to go along with those strong runs when he would have them shows that SVG can go wheel to wheel with the drivers of NASCAR. He does make the full-time move to the Cup Series in 2025 with Trackhouse, and it will be interesting to see if he can adapt to the ovals as well as he did in the Xfinity Series. But given what we saw in his part-time Cup starts on the road courses this past season, I believe it's a safe bet to pencil him in for a playoff spot with the number of road courses we have through the regular season. Now, moving on to the NASCAR Cup Series, we're first going to take a look at the moves made by Stewart-Haas Racing as they added Josh Berry and Noah Gragson to fill out their driver lineup. Obviously, Stewart-Haas Racing is no more, at least on the Stewart side of things. Haas will still be competing in the Cup Series, but Josh Berry replaced the retiring Kevin Harvick, and while it was a struggle for Josh Berry in this rookie season with the team, he finished 27th in the standings. He did have 4 top 10s and 2 top 5s. And strong runs at tracks, like he had third-place finishes at Darlington and New Hampshire. And at New Hampshire, he looked especially strong as he looked like he was in a good spot to get the upset win and could have possibly put himself in the playoffs. Outside of that, he also had a strong Bristol Spring race where he started second and finished 12th. He led 25 laps, and that was the race where tire wear was key and everyone had their own ways of managing it. Berry looked early on in that race to be someone to contend with, ultimately, as I said, finishing in 12th. Meanwhile, at Iowa in the Cup Series first race there, he led a career-high 32 laps and finished in 7th. So he performed well at short tracks, which is no surprise. They are his bread and butter. And you look at the rest of the schedule and the struggles he had, it's really not much of a surprise. Stewart-Haas Racing had its fair share of struggles over the past few seasons. And it was hard to expect much from Berry's rookie year, especially when the news was announced that this team was shutting down. But he did have a few high notes, and now he moves on to another Ford team with Wood Brothers Racing, who has had struggles of their own since having Harrison Burton. Hopefully pairing them up with Josh Berry, who is a veteran in his own right. He's good at getting the most out of his equipment, but also keeping it clean. Hopefully those two will mesh well, and we'll see the Wood brothers have runs like they did back when Ryan Blaney was in their driver seat. Then you have Noah Gragson, who replaced Eric Almirola. Before the season, I would have given this signing an F grade, but Noah turned out to be one of the more surprising performers this season after he had a disastrous rookie season in 2023 with Legacy Motor Club. From struggling to finish races in his rookie season to that controversial suspension, it seemed like Noah's time as a Cup Series driver was over. He then signed with Stewart-Haas Racing and reinvigorated his career and, in my opinion, boosted his Cup stock. His average finish in his rookie year with LMC was 28.2. This year with Stewart-Haas Racing, he nearly improved it by 10 positions with an average finish at the end of the year of 19.6. He had 1 top 5 and 7 top 10s, and early on in the season, he looked like an upset win waiting to happen, especially at the super speedways. Overall, I would say this was probably the second best signing from silly season overall. But the top silly season signing for the Cup Series has to go to Spire Motorsports, who brought up Carson Hocevar from the Craftsman Truck Series. This was supposed to be Spire Motorsports' breakout year. They expanded to 3 full-time cars with Corey LaJoie, Carson Hocevar, and Zane Smith, and also brought over crew chiefs Luke Lambert and Stephen Doran, who came from Stewart-Haas Racing after working with Kevin Harvick and Rodney Childers, winning the championship with them. This team has been making moves to be more competitive, and you could see it with who they're bringing into their shop. And while it wasn't the breakout season that they were looking for, they are still positives from 2024 to look at, mainly Rookie of the Year Carson Hocevar. This signing had big potential when it was announced, and Hocevar performed as expected. He had an up and down first half of the season, followed by more consistency in the second half. He was a top 20, borderline top 15 driver in the second half of the year, with a highest finish of 3rd at Watkins Glen. Now, with the departures of Zane Smith and Corey LaJoie, Hocevar has a prime opportunity of being the new workhorse of this team. The main thing he and his team will need to work on and communicate together with is the mistakes and poor decisions that he continues to make from his Truck Series days. Questionable self-inflicted spins and over-aggressiveness have to be tempered if he and Spire want to take that next step in the Cup Series ranks and become threats for wins and dark horse contenders for the championship. His teammate Zane Smith, who was also brought to Spire Motorsports from the Truck Series, he also had a tale of 2 seasons in 2024. He could consistently be found in the basement of the running order through the first half of the year, and it looked like his career was going from top prospect to potential Truck Series lifer right in front of our eyes. Then at Gateway, that started to change as he was able to get back-to-back top 20s there, followed by Sonoma. Then at Nashville, the dam nearly broke open with a second-place finish and a photo finish to eventual Cup Series champ Joey Logano. That 5 overtime finish was the turning point for Zane's season. His car could be seen up front more often, even though the results may not show it. In the last 19 races of the year, he wound up with 1 top 5 and 2 top 10s, but most importantly, 9 finishes in the top 20 after only having 2 leading up to the Gateway race. Zane just announced that he is going back to Front Row Motorsports for 2025 full-time in the Cup Series, where they will have quite the lineup between Zane, Todd Gilliland, and Noah Gragson. And with Zane going back to a team that he is so familiar with, that will lead to a better start in 2025. So now that we have looked back over the 2024 silly season signings and how they performed, we can look ahead to the 2025 season, and that's exactly what we'll do in the next 2 episodes as we preview the upcoming seasons for the Craftsman Truck Series, the Xfinity Series, as well as the NASCAR Cup Series. I hope y'all enjoyed this episode, and I want to thank y'all for joining me and listening along. And if you haven't done it already, be sure to hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening to this podcast from. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their week, and we will see y'all next time on 3 Wide.